So that's kind of where it leads into, okay, well, what are your options here? And so the three options, it gets off the heels of that last slide, is you can let the Z's set up their own accounts. You can set up the accounts with the Z's, and you can set up the accounts for the Z's. So I'm going to kind of break down the pros and cons of each of these. They all have a place. It might be some directories you do everything for them and some you don't. But anyway, let's talk about that here right now. So if you let the Z's set up their own accounts, okay, the only pro that really comes to mind for me is Google and Facebook actually probably would consider that less risky because it's a real person setting up their own account. They actually track IPs. They know they're a real person. So there is a level of security where there's a slight, benefit to letting them do that. I don't think that benefit outweighs all the other cons. And so, but I wanted to at least point out that there is a slight benefit if you let them do that. But the cons are, okay, you give them all the guidelines in the world. You have Z's that are different spectrums of how technology challenged they are, and they set them up wrong. And now when they set them up wrong, or they lose their password or whatever, guess who they're going to call? They're going to call you and say, what do I do here? How do I fix this? And now guess what? You're spending more energy fixing one problem than you could have done potentially by doing all of the work for them, right? So, you just have to be aware that this is very likely to happen, and I've seen it happen a lot. So I've made mistakes setting things up. So you have to follow a process. You need to have somebody that does this every day, doing it, and then it gets done right. And so you just have to kind of be aware that this isn't going to just happen perfectly. Then when getting them done on time, you guys know the onboarding process. You guys want onboarding in 60, 90, 120 days, and getting these accounts set up, plugging into reporting and getting your website updated with links and things, like it needs to happen. And during onboarding, these Z's are very busy. They might not get to it. And now you're spending more energy bugging them to get to it than it would take for you again to do it yourself. And then also when they're done, they don't give the brand access to them. They're like, they don't know how to do it. So anyway, all these things lead to potential issues that you got to chase down. You got to micromanage. You need to have a project manager that just manages this, and you might as well just have them do the work at that point. Is kind of how I look at it. So that leads into the second option, which is setting the accounts up with the Z's. And what I mean by this is, you can have a list of these accounts and you can tell the Z, hey, if you give me permission, I'm going to go set these up for you, but here's 4 or 5 accounts that we can get on a Zoom and set up together, because frankly, there are a couple directories that actually need a little bit of personalized attention, where they need things verified on the phone, they need emails verified, things like that. So there is a play where it's helpful to do it with the Z's. So the pros of this one is then it gets set up right because it's with the guidance of one of your marketing team members, or maybe a vendor that might do this. Accounts will get then properly integrated to the management tools, because now you have somebody on board that's making sure that happens. And then the Z's feel supported, right? They have somebody helping them to guide through this. They feel like, hey, look, I'm getting value from my investment here. And then it's just kind of a feel-good scenario. The cons is you got to coordinate the call with the Z's. They don't show up. That becomes a management thing. You think they're excited, but they're very busy doing other things, especially during onboarding. Some Z's are technology challenged. They don't even know how to log into Facebook the first time. They don't know how to do any of these 2-factor authentication stuff. It just turns into this, it's imagine like helping my grandpa, log into Facebook the first time is like what you'll deal with some people. So that becomes a challenge. And then it's resource intense. Like I said, you got to have one of your team members do this. And it takes some wrangling and some work. So there's some benefits to that. And maybe there's a balance here where you do it for a couple, and then and then that leads on to the next one, which is you set up the accounts for the Z's. In this case, it gets set up right, it gets set up fast, done. It follows the brand guidelines, set up. It also gets integrated into your management reporting tools. Everything's in one place where you can monitor these things, and then use these tools to help you post and to manage the posting efficiently and things like that. The cons of that, if you just kind of mandate, we're doing this without any explanation, the Z's feel restricted, like they're not, they're kind of being held back. The other con is some accounts, particularly Instagram, you actually have to have the Z be on the call for that, and I'll explain that in a few minutes here. Why? But anyway, so somewhere here, if I were to do this, I would probably say choose the 95% of the accounts, do it for the Z's, add them so they have ownership of it at some level, and explain to them the who's, what's, and whys of each one of them, and they should be fine with that. There's going to be some accounts you might want to do it with them, but minimize that as much as possible, because again, these issues I mentioned here will come into play and make that whole process more intense. So anyway, so far, Eric, do you have any questions on this? Because there's a lot.
No, this is good. This is good. This is basic stuff, Lonnie, that people have questions about, but they've never really, they're going to ask questions in the Facebook group, and they're going to have someone tell them, you let them do it on their own, you do it with them, or you do it for them, but nobody explains it like this with pros and cons. And so this is great.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of granular details in here. I was trying to keep it broad, but there's definitely more things that come up.
Even naming, how do you name it? What name do you put on that?
Oh, that's a rabbit hole. There's restrictions. There's restrictions to that. Facebook, if you set up Facebook a certain way, they want it the same name as the brand. So now, whereas the brands sometimes want their Z's to have a location, name where it really defines the location, so that becomes a problem. But there's ways around it. But so there's some nuances here that don't make it perfect. But oh man, don't get me started on name.
What would you suggest for naming? What would you suggest as your top 2 solutions for naming?
Well, naming in the past, and this is my SEO hat on, having the geographic city in your name was helpful for SEO. I would say
if you're in Austin, it's Austin.
Correct. So you want to have.
There are multiple franchisees in Austin.
I know. Well, that makes it even harder. So now you want to break down the geographic region of Austin: North Austin, Northwest Austin, East Austin. Sometimes these geographic areas have these nicknames, I guess, that aren't really official names, but people recognize them as certain parts of these different cities. And so sometimes that would be okay. If you got to think about the consumers of the Z's, what are they going to relate to? Because people want to stay localized, and so you have to be conscious of not forcing the Z to fall. So I would definitely listen to a Z when it comes to naming, especially in their geographic area. If they have suggestions, it's not going to hurt or help that much when it comes to SEO or tactical stuff. It really, the benefit is if you do something very geographically specific and that customer of the Z relates to that and it makes them want to work at that Z, that's what you want. So if the Z wants it Emerald Coast, which is something I've actually heard, but it's not officially a name, but it's something that people relate to locally, by all means, call it Emerald Coast. So
you don't want to, where you get franchisees upset is if you have the name and it's Austin, and then another franchisee comes in so-and-so already got the name Austin. I'm in Austin. And then, that causes some confusion and frustration.
We need another 30 minutes on the naming.
All right, we'll move on from that.
I can explain SEO benefits, how Z's perceive it. There's definitely lots of layers there to coming up with the right name. And it's definitely, man, I've been in so many conversations about naming. So I know that's an issue that people struggle with.
But in general, name it for the region or the local thing where it is. That's kind of the generic advice. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, I would. That's more of a user experience situation that I would name it for, not for any SEO benefit or anything. There's an argument for some of that, but I would basically say it's probably not worth it compared to relating to the consumer and the benefit that brings. So,
all right, moving on.